Last year, everybody thought I was silly talking about the risks of gold because, again, long-term chart of gold shows you that in dollar terms, it's always been a more volatile asset than equities. I always say the big part missing in everybody's portfolio, including the retirees' portfolio, is global investing. But we tend to hold on to our losers that let it come back to my price and then I will get back. The market has absolutely no interest in what price you bought it. If you are looking at a strategy level, I mean, how do we do things? We think, so and so has made so much money. What was the strategy they followed, and I should follow that? That's a wrong question in the first place. So let us look at genuinely transformational technologies, railroads, 20th century automobiles and aviation, internet. They've all been a graveyard for investors.
Welcome to Bazaar and Beyond. Today we have with us Divina Mehra, founder, chairperson, and managing director at First Global. She has spent more than 3 decades in capital markets with deep experience across research, investment strategy, and fund management. She's also the author of Money, Myths, and Mantras, a book that challenges many commonly accepted beliefs around investing, asset allocation, diversification, and long-term wealth creation. Thank you, Divina ma'am, for joining us on Bazaar and Beyond and giving us your time. I wanted to start off with one of the tidbits that I found during the research that you've mentioned before, that nowadays we should move away from the theory that as we approach retirement, our equity allocations should also go down. At some place, you have also mentioned that maybe you'll have to rethink this in terms of how much you reduce the equity allocation for. That has to do with lifespan, and also how equity also performs over a period of time. Could you just shed a little light on that, because it's contrary to conventional wisdom?
Okay. So, first of all, I think the two pieces of financial advice often given by experts or professionals, which are completely off on asset allocation. One, be 100% in equity when you are young, and be 0% in equity when you are retiring.
Mhm.
Both of these are not correct, because never be 100% in equity, first of all.
Okay.
Because typically, sometimes people send me messages saying I'm 25 and in a good job, so should I be 100% in equity? So never be 100% in equity, because equity is not predictable. So never have anything in equity that you may need within the next 6, 7, 8 years.
Okay.
So even if you're in a good job, you might lose your job, or you might want to study more, or you might to put in down payment on a house, or there might be a medical emergency. So certain portion should always be outside in more predictable assets. But now, I mean, people think retirement is kind of somewhere close to the end of your life. But if you look at the data, the average Indian at age 60 has a life expectancy of about 19, 20 years. And that's the average Indian. The
Correct.
people watching this podcast, it is a lot higher.
Okay.
So basically, your retired life can be 30, 35 years, as long as your career. That's the part which very few people consciously think of, which also means that your money has to last for 30, 35 years. And if you put it all in 100% safe assets, you're not even going to beat inflation probably on a post-tax basis. So therefore, a reasonable proportion of your retirement corpus should be in equity. The caveat to that again is it should not be money you planning to withdraw within the next 5, 7 years. Because what happens is, in equity, the order of returns matter. So if we know equity goes up one year, goes down another year, if the down years come early, if suppose you put 100% in equity and the down year comes early, and next year your 100 has gone down to 80 or 85, you still need to take out your 5. Now that goes completely out of your capital, and therefore your money, which was supposed to last 30 years, might run out in 20 years. So that's what you don't want. So it should, but still a reasonable portion should be in equity, because over the long term, equity does give you higher compounding. And of course, I always say the big part missing in everybody's portfolio, including the retirees' portfolio, is global investing. But I suppose we'll come to that later.
Actually, that's my next question. When I was reading your book, you spoke in there about how the Asian crisis, the Asian tigers, that when those economies went down and stock markets went down, that kind of convinced you the fact that you have to offer, any person in your business has to offer global equity to their clients. And right now we are in the same discussion. Like if you see Twitter, if you see all social media videos, a lot of people are talking that, and you have built your business on the basis of providing global expertise to your clients. Just want to understand how a lay investor should approach this kind of a predicament, because we have certain limitations in terms of how much we can invest as RBI rules, whether it is MF, whether it is direct equity. Direct equity, you can go into LRS, and RBI rules specify how much of MF can invest. It's a $7.5 billion industry level cap. How does a lay investor think about this? Because you have been working so extensively you have also built expertise in investing in a lot of global stocks. I mean, in your book, you have written extensively about how you have built the expertise in research also. So how does an investor get there in terms of that exposure that you're talking about?
Okay, first of all, I mean, I'll tell you the why you should be global. And suddenly everybody has discovered it simply because India didn't do well in the last year and a half. I'm sure if India does a lot better in the next 1 year, which is my base case, you might not see so much of global. But I have been talking about global all along. And one piece of data which I always give is that when I started working, the dollar was 12 rupees. So in the course of less than a career, you've seen a 90% depreciation. So when you're planning for financial goals, which are 10, 20, 30 years ago, later, you cannot forget that the rupee depreciates. So that's the basic thing. Then, of course, you mentioned the Asian crisis. Yes, I mean, this is the book. So let me just show your viewers that this is the book, Money, Myths and Mantras. And so that was just one major thing, because all those markets in dollar terms, the markets fell and the currencies fell. So in dollar terms, all those markets fell between 50 and 90%. And it was kind of a wake-up call for me. So, and Indonesia fell 90%. In my Citibank days, I had spent a few months in Indonesia setting up Citicorp Securities subsidiary. So I could really imagine that if I was Indonesian today, 90% of the net worth would be gone. So that, besides the fact that I wanted to learn more and I was bored of doing the same old Indian stocks. So, but this was the other thing, that don't put all your eggs in one basket, because this is what can happen in a crisis. And remember, those were not basket case economies. Those were the highest growing economies of the 90s. So that's that. So that was the wake up call that you can't have all your eggs in one basket, and nobody had ever dreamt of going global at that stage. RBI did not have a category for any financial company setting up a subsidiary other than a bank.
Okay.
And we were not just the first Indian, we were the first Asian members of the London Stock Exchange. So First Global was the first Asian member of the London Stock Exchange other than the Japanese. And that was 99. The US broker dealer took another year and a half. So so we've been following global stocks since then. And it scares me, the kind of people I see talking today about global investing, because actually they don't have a clue. And global companies are more complex. Understanding them is not easy. So the list of companies itself changes. So if I go to the early 2000s, when we had started covering US stocks, the tech majors meant, of course, some of them have made a recent comeback, but tech major meant IBM, Dell, Motorola, Cisco. Cisco, people forget, at one point was the highest market cap company in the whole world. It was and then it fell 86%. So in the current AI boom, you have to remember that this has been the history. So you have to be careful when going overseas. Unfortunately, a lot of people offering global products today in the Indian markets actually have no expertise. They are there. I mean, unfortunate. I mean, I'm in an AMC market office, but I think overall in India, the asset management industry, and maybe elsewhere also, is an asset gathering industry. So the reason they offer a product is that today I can gather assets under this head. Not that this is the best thing to do at today's price, or that I have the expertise to do it. So if I was looking at all the Gift City products, most of them are down for the last 6 months. Even the global equity markets have done well. Last 1 year, nobody is even close to the benchmark. I mean, our multi-asset global product has done far better than all these equity-only products, which, a multi-asset means it has low yielding fixed income and all of that. Still, it has done better, because you can't do this without expertise. And most people, I have posted a caricature, and this is not just for global markets, overall, that you of somebody driving a car looking backwards. and that's what you do. So what happened? You set up you think it's easy. Ki global product I have set up. You know the names of 10 US stocks. You know the name of 4 Asian stocks. You invest in that, and that is what causes this lag, because the story of those 7, 8, what used to be or still are called the Magnificent Seven tech stocks in the US, they drove the S&P almost entirely in 2023 and 24. So more than 50% of the S&P move was just these 2 stocks.
Okay.
But you were not looking that in 2025 already that bull started to tire. 5 of those stocks underperformed the S&P. Only Google and Nvidia did well. And this year they have completely lagged. Then you are, that now everything, the Russell 2000 is up, all the sectors. Russell 2000 is the mid small
Yes.
cap US. So that has done far better than the S&P this year.
Okay.
And S&P also, on these Mag 7 have contributed only 6% of the S&P movement. Now the thing has passed to semiconductors. Again, people think like semiconductor. I even saw somebody saying that, look at the P to growth for semiconductors. It looks so good. I said, you have no idea how this industry works. I mean, we have followed all these stocks for 25 years. It's a highly cyclical industry. Semiconductor and semiconductor equipment are highly capital intensive and highly cyclical. Both because they are capital intensive and because they are supplying somebody else's capital expenditure. I mean, it's too deep to go into just now. But basically, you don't understand the intricacies, then you. So, how the Indian investor should do it? Of course, you see, this has been a cause for me. So, I have not started talking about it in the last 6 months or 1 year. I've been talking about it for years. And we've been offering a product which starts at $10,000, which is all geographies, all assets. Because going global doesn't mean just buying the US. This is another myth. People think they're like US is enough diversification. No, I mean, there are long periods when US underperforms. Just because that has not happened in the last 10, 12 years largely, I mean, barring 2022, doesn't mean that the US never underperforms. So you have to have all assets in all geographies. So our products are at 10,000, which not long ago was 7.5 lakh rupees. Now it is like 9 odd lakh rupees. And if you just want to buy, I would not recommend it. A US index, better if at all you want to buy a global index. And that ETF, those ETFs are available. You can open a broking account and buy it yourself. There's no reason to pay somebody a fees just for them to hold an ETF on your behalf. Uh, ACW as an all country world index or something like that. Or even if you want to buy a US index, then buy it yourself. There's no point having an intermediary for that. Though I have, and I saw, I think, one Gift City product from one of the AMCs, which is an index product. So if you want to buy that, you can buy that. But otherwise, be very careful on who you are entrusting with your money. That they should have expertise and they should have some, accountability. That's the other thing, that you have a fund of funds, then it's getting managed elsewhere. The fund manager here has no accountability because they are not managing it at all. You're just adding a layer of cost. So if you want to even buy a US mutual fund or any other global mutual fund or ETF, then you can open a broking account and buy it yourself.
So we mentioned about this semiconductor theme being cyclical. So I mean, what we have also seen in India, that the whole AI boom has impacted a lot of IT companies here also. And I think it was 2 weeks ago, if I'm not wrong, over the weekend, the whole Twitter sphere was going on about how Indian ITs, they never innovated, a lot was written, and then there was pushback from the veterans of the IT sector leadership also, who were past leaders and all that. A lot of people were writing about this. So where do you see this cyclicality impacting Indian markets in terms of the valuation compression that has happened? I mean, how do you see this whole playing out in the last 6-7 months where we have seen this impact? Because you said your base case is India, you're positive on India. So how do you see this playing out?
See, the semiconductor cyclicality is a different thing. See,
The AI boom.
so I will just tell you why that happens also. Because if you are, let's say, selling toothpaste, if you sell 500 crores of toothpaste this year, next year you're not going to go to 100 crores. It will be plus minus from 500. Whereas if you are supplying something which is capital expenditure for someone else, you really start from zero every year. So if you look at this year, the AI expenditure is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, there are all kinds of estimates from 800 billion to $1 trillion. So not only does, and not just semiconductor, that's how, Dell and IBM and all the hardware suppliers have also come out of nowhere.
Mhm.
You have demand and you have pricing power. But 2 years later, will the AI expenditure capex be 800 billion? that's the trillion-dollar question. Because 2 years ago, these same companies total capex used to be of the order of $150 billion. So that's why it is highly cyclical, besides the fact that it itself is capital intensive. So I mean, this will become a kind of a finance course, but I mean, there's any capital intensive industry is cyclical, because the capacity comes out in batches. So whether it's hotel or cement or steel, that's why. I mean, that's why these are cyclical. Coming to IT, I have not started saying this now. I mean, this has been my bugbear with IT for 20 years, Indian IT
Mhm.
companies, that you had the cash, tons of cash, you had the trained people, and you did not try to move up the value chain. I mean, in contrast to China, and not just in IT, in anything, they started from like mass manufacturing, and then you go to technology, you go up. So that's one part of the story. Having said that, I have not been the saying that this is the end of IT services, because if you look at their obituary, has been written many times. Earliest being Y2K, that all the business is Y2K, Y2K will be over, and then they will be
And
left
during
with no
cloud
business.
transition also
The
early.
cloud transition, digital, SaaS, software as a service,
Mhm.
that comes, then these guys be. So, see, within their sphere, they're able to pivot their business. That I have seen time and time again. And this case, also remember, AI is not something where the CTO will, the chief technology officer, or any large enterprise will just hand over the keys to AI. I had to write it very briefly. I've just, in my last column in Mint, I have mentioned that there's a paper called Agents of Chaos. They tried actually giving the rights to these models, and they created chaos from wiping out whole systems, database, lying. There are like so many points of failure, security breaches. So even if you go to AI as an enterprise, you will need somebody to intermediate that. So that's, but the I am more concerned from the macro point of view, because the last 25 years, the big driver of India's employment has been IT. And that may not be the case, at least for few years. We see most technologies, when they come in, everybody says that this will really kill jobs. And it does in the first round. But eventually the jobs come back and more. I mean, you look at banking in the 80s, there were so many strikes saying if you computerize, then everybody loses their job and all that. Today, banking employs far more people than it did. I mean, I'm talking in India. So this, every technology, that's the story. Right from the time spinning and weaving was mechanized, that ultimately it increases productivity, increases people. But for now, of course, the hiring and the number of people, that is, as I said, is a more of a macro concern, that last 25 years, direct employment by IT-enabled services, plus there's a multiplier effect, that for everybody who's working, then there's a driver, there's a
Correct.
food delivery, there's real estate. That's more of a concern for me. But I don't think, ki IT services are going to zero. NASSCOM on the employment things, it will be a J curve, that there'll be a decline and then there will be a sharp increase.
So I just want to change track a little bit in terms of how investors, like, they have certain beliefs which might be contrary to their goals, which might, you also write this in your book. So what are these such certain dangerous assumptions that you would like to point out to our audience in terms of कि ये आप मत करिए. It might feel okay now, but in the future this might actually do harm to your portfolio.
There are lots and lots. In fact,
Something
that's
that, yeah, in the
that's
book
what
you've dealt, I just want to
I've
like a
tried to
smattering
few.
of it.
I mean, like for example, one of the ones which sounds very good is buy and forget.
Yeah.
That so you should hold on to whatever is your equity allocation as a total equity allocation, but
Mhm.
don't hold on to the same stocks. I mean, just to give you an example, the original Sensex list had a lot of paper, textile, shipping,
Mhm.
companies like Premier Automobiles, Hindustan Motors, which used to make the old Fiat and Ambassador cars, and and in terms of groups, it was Mafatlals and Thapars and Scindias and all that. And so, I mean, many of those companies have gone nowhere. So, I mean, you hear all these stories, ki, oh, somebody's grandparents bought Hindustan Lever and this is worth so much, or somebody's parent bought HDFC Bank. But you forget all the failures. So this is technically called survivorship bias, that you remember the successes, you forget the failures. People say, oh, so much money has been made in HDFC Bank and Kotak Mahindra Bank, but you forget that at that time there were a lot of other banks who got licenses and which went bust. You know, Global Trust Bank, Times Bank, Yes Bank went through such a big problem, and many others, Centurion Bank, many public sector banks. So that's how your mind tricks you. So it's not that you have to hold the same stocks, and the Sensex stocks at that time were the blue chips. It's not as if there was something wrong with the index formation, and all of them had long histories. So they'd been around decades. These were all very well established business groups. Yet this was the trajectory. I mean, barring Indian Hotels, which was a relatively new company at that time, everything else was, they were all very old companies. So that's the way your mind trips you up. There are many ways actually your mind trips you up. One other thing is that we tend to hold on to our losers, that let it come back to my price and then I will get back. The market has absolutely no interest in what price you bought it at. And so you get out of whatever is not making sense. I sometimes say that in your DP statement, your last page is like your exes, that you don't want to remember that you ever loved them. So go to the last page of your DP statement, जिसे बोलते हैं दिल कड़ा करके, get rid of all the junk. So, and put it in some place sensible. So, that's something you can do. Have a proper risk management system, have stop losses, which these are the things which you overlook, because investing is a loser's game. You have to play it not for the sixes. You have to play it for not to get out. So don't take a big hit on your capital. That has to be your first driving force.
Got it. So would you think that being I mean, specifically with respect to an Indian investor who's over invested in the Indian market, that home country bias, which is built into most of our portfolios, you think that is also something which people are not very aware of?
Of course,
Usually on the-
that I started with that.
Yeah, because-
that in the asset allocation, the biggest missing thing is not enough global stocks. I mean, and that's where I started.
Because the
because
SIPs
asset allocation doesn't mean just asset allocation within India.
Correct.
That's the biggest thing, which is like kind of the whole.
I'll tell you why I'm circling back to that, because a lot of people, when I speak to them, they just think of investing as SIPs now, which is the success of the whole AMC industry and AMFI. But somehow that asset allocation right now is when I'm seeing people talk more about it, but still it feels like ऊपर से जा रहा है लोगों का. But they don't seem to be able to understand that. And I guess industry also has a lot of work to do in terms of explaining asset allocation, because I think in your book also you keep talking about that people only think of large cap, small cap specifically, and they don't look beyond in terms of asset. Specifically, I think you also spoke about commodities and also...
Gold. I will say gold again, there were all these fairly large AMC heads who in 2024 were saying, gold is lying useless in your locker, sell it and put it in equity. When gold went up, the same people were offering gold funds. And then in January of 2026, inflows into gold funds in India exceeded equity inflows, which was the peak of the cycle.
First time I think it's happened, yeah.
So that was the peak of the cycle. I'd written it that time.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah, because I mean, last year everybody thought I was, silly talking about the risks of gold, because again, long-term chart of gold shows you that in dollar terms, it's always been a more volatile asset than equities. It has had huge drawdowns. I mean, in 2025, when it was running up, I saw a headline saying gold has not seen a rally like this since 1979. I said, you go forward from there. Na? Kya hua uske baad? So 1980, gold made a high. That high was not crossed for 27 years. The next time that $1980 price came was 2007. 19 years later, in 1999, it was down 60% still from that peak. And it was not an aberration. The next peak, it fell 40%. So that's the nature of the beast, But coming back to why Indians don't think about it, part of the reason is that when we were growing up, there was no option to invest abroad. So, your mindset is set from there. I mean, when I started working, and well after that, you'd be surprised, even when you were traveling abroad, you could take only $500, and that too once in 3 years. Second time you went in 3 years, you had to leave the country with only $20 in your pocket, and your credit card said valid only in India and Nepal. So you had to go travel with no money. And so our grandmothers were not wrong in buying gold, because at that time that was the only hard currency asset you had access to.
You say that that's the exchange to exposure to foreign exchange also comes through gold.
That's what I said. That was the only hard currency asset you had exposure to. So they were right. And that is why the rupee chart of gold looks okay, because it's essentially a rupee depreciation chart. Even though the dollar price of gold went, in 19 years it fell 60%, but the rupee price of gold in 19 years did go up because the rupee depreciated. So that's the whole thing. But now that access, this liberalized remittance scheme of the RBI has been down, I think, around almost 20 years. But still, it has not really seeped into people that yes, this option is available and I should look at it seriously, and I should do something about it, and it should be significant. I mean, there's no point putting 2% or 5%. That's not good enough.
One thing I read in your book, I mean, it is more specific to Warren Buffett and his performance, but I also want to apply that to India, because a lot of us, I mean, I used to be a journalist before, so we used to write about what X investor is buying, and then there's a lot of platforms that also track their portfolios on a real-time basis, and they give alerts and stuff like that. You have specifically called it out in saying that ki ye, all the gurus don't always outperform. So a lot of old adages that are acquired, and people try to invest through that. You've also spoken a little bit in the book specifically as to how to move away from the base that they had created. Like, say, Peter Lynch ke bare mein bhi you had specifically mentioned that. Just wanted, if you could just contextualize that for the Indian audience, because a lot of them I've seen say, I've got an alert on my app and says that this person has bought in this company. A lot of retail investors go and buy that. Just they build kind of like a froth kinds of builds up there. So just thought I'll pick your brain on this in terms of this behavior.
See, why you should not follow famous investors. That is one of the longer chapters in my book. Some of the chapters are shorter, and I'd insisted to the publisher that I want to vary the length according to how much it takes to explain something. So there are many levels to this. So one is, of course, Warren Buffett, not that he's a bad investor or in a lot of the fundamentals you've read from his initial things, but oftentimes the investor is not doing what you think they are doing. So Warren Buffett, everybody thinks, made his money, or for that matter, his guru, Ben Graham, who had written this whole book on value investing, which people, I don't know how much they read it. Everybody has on their desk that we follow this kind of approach. But Ben Graham himself made most of his fortune in an insurance company, not in the value companies he talks about. So also with Warren Buffett actually, in spite of whatever he says about derivatives, he has made a lot of money on derivatives. So structured deals and derivatives of that kind. And of course, his last 20 years, he hasn't really outperformed at all. Also, oftentimes what happens is that a strategy may work at a particular time in a particular market, but it doesn't always work. So you mentioned Peter Lynch. So yes, I mean, his whole thing of buy the stocks of the companies whose products you like. So you like toothpaste, or you like, he mentions like his wife's pantyhose. So he goes and buys that company. But that worked because that particular profile of companies worked well in the US markets in the 80s and part of the 90s. The real superpower of a Peter Lynch is that he managed that fund, which was the Magellan Fund of Fidelity, which was the best performing mutual fund ever in history. I think 29% compounding or something. There's another story to that. But I think his superpower was recognizing that this performance and this strategy were not replicable. So he retired in just 14 years. He retired in his mid 40s. Who retires in their mid 40s? But he realized, this was
Okay, Abhi.
this was an aberration. I will not be able to replicate. So that was enough to recognize that. I mean, that is the big thing I give him credit for. And when you're talking, all these alerts, first of all, it may be entirely false. The other thing is you don't know the entire thing with that the investor is doing. Where this one transaction fits in his overall thing. What is there? What are the hedges they have put in?
Correct. Yeah.
All those things you don't know. So that's a fool's errand. But even if you are looking at a strategy level, I mean, how do we do things? We think, so and so has made so much money. What was the strategy they followed, and I should follow that? That's a wrong question in the first place. So, for example, a very high risk strategy where every year 90% of the people go bankrupt, but the 10 people who are left will, let us say, make the money 10 times. You play this game 5 times, 99% people have gone bankrupt, but one person has made out like a bandit. Now you said this person started with 1 crore and now they have 50,000 crores, so this is the strategy to follow. But no, 99% probability that you will go bankrupt.
Yeah.
So people used to ask Rakesh Jhunjhunwala also, you made your first money in trading. Why do you tell people not to trade? He said, I smoke, but I tell my children not to smoke. That's because that's not a sensible thing to do.
Interesting. Nice. So, ma'am, I in this book, I love this point. You spoke a lot about circle of competence in terms of whether it's fund managers, whether it's anyone, like even advisors. We were talking about that also before we started recording.
Yeah.
In terms of whether advisors, if someone is going through a advisor-led investing experience, how do they evaluate circle of whether their advisor is competent? Like you also touched upon that briefly. So could you just expand on that concept that you
Yeah,
explained?
actually, what I've written about in the book is something different. When
Yeah.
the context for circle of
Yeah,
competence, that's one of the myths.
Mhm.
So like people say that invest only in your circle of competence, which is okay if you are, if you are a retail investor doing a little bit of individual stocks here and there along with your mutual fund. But what does circle of competence mean? It is a euphemism for comfort zone. So, as a professional fund manager, you cannot say I invest in my circle of competence. If you only understand banks and FMCG, consumer goods, what are you going to do? Because themes always change in markets. That what are you going to do when something else, let us say metals and defense or something else starts doing well, industrial start doing well, because you're saying that I don't understand that. So that was the context in the book on circle of competence. What the question you are asking is that how do we evaluate the financial advisors? So again, you have to look at what their track record has been, what have they been saying. And the problem is that I mean, there is frankly a lot of mis-selling in financial services at all levels. The retiree goes to the bank and the bank RM will try to sell them an insurance product which is totally unsuitable for them. The thematic funds, we actually tracked it over since the mutual fund industry started. We looked at when were various themes, when were the IT funds, when were they launched, when were pharma funds launched, when did small caps, defense, PSU, whatever. We found almost their time to perfection, that they come near the peak of that theme. Uske baad the thing is like this. So, on social media, somebody sent me a message, ma'am, you keep talking against thematic funds. Look at this technology fund. I won't name the fund house. It was 2 rupees in 2003. Look at it, 21 years, how much it has compounded. I said, very good. It was 2 rupees in 2003. Now look at when it was launched. So it was launched time to perfection, 1 week before the global tech crash. So said in 2.5 years, it went from 10 to 2 rupees. That's the part you are missing. That from the time it was launched in 2.5 years, it was down 80%. Who would have lived through that 80% and lived to see the compounding after that? So that unfortunately is so. I mean, first of all, be financially literate. I think it should be there in schools, to the ability to calculate an internal rate of return and CAGR, so that if somebody, at least like I was talking about these insurance products and all, at least you can calculate that if I'm paying this much is going as this person's cut in the beginning, what is the amount being invested, like ULIPs. if you had somebody calculated the rate of return, they would know that it is a very poor rate of return. It just sounds good that you put in so much and you get, these many lakhs, and after 20 years you get this many crores. But uh, you should be able to at least calculate that. Also, make sure you're in. Typically anybody who's been investing in the markets for a full year, for a few years, you see that their portfolio might have 25 mutual fund schemes, because whichever scheme or the fund house that was giving the incentive at a particular time, every year their advisor is adding 3 schemes to that. So you
Interesting. So,
yeah.
ma'am, I've read a lot about what you've written in the recent past, and one thing that caught my, I think, you've written about the AI boom also a little bit, and the SpaceX IPO. I mean, there's no recommendation of any company. Guess just all our viewers just to understand, because I think this is a very important distinction to be made. You have analyzed the threadbare. You've also discussed in terms of what will work, what will not work. It seems like the IPO has come in a time where the interest is peaked, and that company is also like a amalgamation of two different businesses, but it's still getting that top dollar value. Do you think that this is kind of indicating like there is a top in that AI in terms of the rat race to build and then they will come, kind of a that's the narrative that everyone seems to
It
be
is
pushing.
not even build and they will come. I mean, just raise money at. And SpaceX, the article I had written was not even about the business and valuation so much as the fact that you have no safeguards. I mean, that there is no corporate governance possible, because what Elon Musk has done is he's taken the money of investors and given them no shareholder rights. So the shareholder rights are all with him. He can change the board as he wants. He can pay himself what he wants. He can even merge a private company of his with this company at any valuation, and the shareholders have no recourse to even question that.
Yeah.
So that is peak stupidity. I mean, that is like giving him the divine right to rule. And so in the past also he's merged businesses in this SpaceX. Going forward he can do that, and the name is SpaceX, but if you actually go through the prospectus, it is not much of it is to do with SpaceX.
Yeah.
And then he's talking about that our skill is to identify new $1 trillion opportunities. And if you read the history of financial bubbles, this is always the peak of the bubble. Like if you see the South Sea bubble, ultimately, I mean, now it is all talked about. Look at the people who were so stupid that there was this company which came and raised money and said we will put it in a great enterprise, but we don't know what it is, and people gave them money. So I'm 100, and this I have said publicly, and I think posted also, that the next chapter of the some future edition of book on financial bubbles will have this, that not only is the valuation crazy, people are giving money with no safeguards, no basic corporate governance possible. I mean, he's changed the because in Delaware, Tesla shareholders could sue him for things. So he's shifted it to a very, very, sort of custom made jurisdiction in Texas, so that basically nobody can question him. So it's like that used to be the thing, na? That the emperor has divine right to rule. So that's what you have given to Elon Musk. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, this is going to not end well. I've written quite a few articles on
There
this.
seems to be a lot of, I think, all these AI firms lining up IPOs within this end of this year and over.
So I just wrote this column yesterday. It came out in Mint, which was on this, that, you know, all the stories, all the narratives you hear about AI, realize one thing: there is no independent verification. They're all coming from interested parties, from companies, their management, their investors. I mean, Vinod Khosla, I saw some time back saying, oh, wouldn't it be a wonderful world? Everybody will have access to medical diagnosis and prescription at zero cost. I said, what zero cost? I mean, you're putting in $1 trillion. Who's going to pay for it?
Exactly.
Already, companies, enterprises are saying AI is not proving to be economical. The Uber CEO said, Keith Nambia, we've tried it, but
You Netflix, yeah.
yeah, it's too expensive. And so people are looking for open source. They're looking for Chinese thing. And then there are many risks. I mean, your data and your everything goes out, and these AI firms have no scruples. I mean, they recently found that Anthropic had signed a agreement saying they would retain no data, and they found 30 days the data was there. Recently, there was something circulating that someone asked AI about some tender and how they should strategize, and the AI pulled out the emails from their competitor that this is, the competition, the CEO and his team are discussing this. So this is how crazy it is. So, and plus now you have unmodelable risk, like US government saying that you have to stop access to XYZ model to all non-Americans. So this is this, and unlike, see, if you see the history of new technologies, one large chunk of the technologies to never do what they promised to do. I
Okay.
mean, look at Facebook changed its name to Meta, saying Metaverse will be where the new world is.
And that
But
whole thing is not that.
so there's many. I mean, I can list
Mhm.
lots.
Mhm.
3D television, self-driving cars have been theoretically around for 20 years. So it takes time. Even what succeeds takes time. But even let us look at genuinely transformational technologies, railroads, 20th century automobiles and aviation, internet. They've all been a graveyard for investors because there's always overvaluation, there's overinvestment, and not only that, the difference in AI is railroad fine. I mean, that company, whatever XYZ company went bust who had built the railroad, but the railroad is still there. So somebody buys it for 20 cents to the dollar and makes it work. But the AI assets are very high obsolescence assets. So if it doesn't work, it has to be junk. There'll be nothing, no value left there.
Interesting.
So, internet, for example, first bust was after the dot-com boom. Then people said, "Oh, let's invest in internet is going to transform people's life. It will be on everybody's desk," which happened also. So let us now invest in the internet infrastructure companies. Now, internet, again, those undersea cables have been around a long time, and the undersea cables on which the internet comes, a large part of that was laid by this company called Global Crossing, which went bust more than 20 years ago. The cables are still in use. But in AI, even the expenditure what they put on will not be in use. And that's only this. I'm still on the economic part of it. Look at the environmental costs. Look at,
Yeah.
it's like India is happy कि data center यहाँ आ रहे हैं, and the whole of US people are protesting against allowing
Because of the
data centers.
power shortage.
Power and water.
Exactly.
It uses huge amount of fresh water. India is already short of water. Many
Yeah, monsoon has not yet come in Bombay.
yeah. Arizona is a desert state, and you're putting mega data centers there. So people are now protesting because now they realize, I mean, you go to some small community in South America and you deplete their water table. That's what happens.
So, do you think the AI theme, specifically the way it is kind of destroying value in other pockets, like I'm just taking an example of the IT services in here. Do you think that what will stop it is less capital being available for all these companies raising billions and hundreds of $1 billion, or you think that just the inherent complexity in scaling that business will kind of put a stop to that accelerated growth that they're projecting?
See, I'm not saying AI will not be a transformational technology or it will not succeed. That's not the point. But will
Just like the internet was.
will all this investment ever make returns on capital? That's the whole thing. That will it ever make enough money to justify this kind of investment? And certain things definitely it will kind of disintermediate. And I think coding is one main thing. I was talking to a small software company, and they said that is one thing we can clearly see, that entry level coding is much faster and much easier, but not that it is 100% perfect. It still needs to be checked, but naturally that's one, that's definitely one use area. But then, as I said, any new technology also increases productivity. It increases all the aspects which you have not thought of today. Even when Instagram, for example, started, it was supposed to be a static photo sharing site, but that it will become a whole business, from selling things to being the influencer. That whole financial and business ecosystem was not envisaged even by their creators. So how this thing evolves and what are the kind of opportunities, because once things become easier, then you do more things. In a sense, you start to use it for more things. You will do things which you would not have done had this easy technology not been available. So those might be transformational, but always, as I said, ek to hai ki who will, in any technology, it is who will succeed. in AI, even in this short period, if you see, it was earlier ChatGPT, then it is Gemini, then it is Claude, then it is this. Every day it changes. So, but I remember what during that, just before that mortgage crisis in the US, which created what was the great financial crisis, GFC of 2008-9. Chuck Prince, who was then the CEO of Citigroup, said that the, they're essentially saying risks are building up. But till the music plays, you have to get up and dance, because as a CEO, if there is growth, even though you know it's high risk growth, if you don't show that growth for 3-4 quarters, you are out of a job. So you have to keep playing that game till, and in tech today it is that we can't afford to miss out on this bus. So I have to invest just to remain in the game. But doesn't mean everybody's capital expenditure will ever make returns.
As we the last few questions, I just thought I'll take a little 30,000 feet perspective in terms of fiscal policy and how monetary policies are evolving now. Because from after you mentioned GFC, the regime globally was easy money, and then during the pandemic again it became easy money, and now that we are out of it, it seems like this constrained fiscal and monetary impulse of authorities will continue in a way, even though in that it will have impact on certain industries, like uh, the way a lot of investors used to come and buy up a lot of Indian stocks from abroad. Like that's one of the reasons why the FPI money flow has also gone down. How do you think the world economy is poised right now in terms of because the appetite for debt fueled growth is also reduced considerably after the COVID pandemic. So it seems like a lot of capital allocation is happening only to certain sectors now, because that's where the demand is, like we had discussed in a little while ago. Just want to understand like where we are in terms of monetary authorities having the capability and the willingness to rescue us from another crisis, because it seems like a lot of themes seem to be overbought right now, as you had alluded, and there's not a lot of fiscal space also to build. Like I've just given an example, like India wants to build semiconductor plants here. We want to build all the manufacturing plants here. There is no fiscal space to be able to continue to support that. PLI was a success, and somehow we have been able to achieve a modicum of success in terms of value addition locally. Purely from an Indian economy standpoint, where do you see
how was PLI a success? Let's hear it. Because
I read an article. I read an article today. I'll tell you.
If you look at manufacturing as a percentage of GDP, we were at about 17.5% from let's say about 2000. Just after the GFC
Right.
onwards, for the next 6-7 years, till we were at about 17.5% for 6 years in a row. Now we are at, depending on the year, 12.5 to 13.5%, which actually is the lowest ever since records began in the 1960s. So I think oftentimes I have, when you are spending money on a policy intervention, you have to see what are you targeting and are you getting that target. So either you have, if you are giving a subsidy to a manufacturing industry, what are you doing it for? Either for employment or for going up the technology chain. Or what is, for example, whatever 7-8 years ago, you cut corporate tax. What did you try to achieve through that? Because if you look at the high corporate taxpayers, there are 2 or 3 categories. There are banks, there are large consumer companies, and there are PSUs. In none of those cases would the tax cut help expenditure or investment in India, which presumably was the target, that if you cut taxes, more money will be spent. But you look at, there's no, if you wanted to give incentive for investment, you could have given an incentive for investment, which has happened in the past.
Yeah.
We
We moved away from that investment-led incentive scheme to more like production-led. I mean, I think it's had something to do with the WTO uh, commitments that we have made with that will not give income-based subsidies. I mean, so we have moved to, and somehow this production-linked incentive scheme was somehow weaved into that system. So
See, production-linked incentive scheme, what happened was that you've given very large subsidies to discrete companies,
Okay.
which you have to then, if you're giving land to someone at at 1 rupee a acre or whatever that 1 rupee a square foot even, what is it that you hope to achieve with that? Because these have been very chunky subsidies, many of the subsidies under PLI.
Mhm.
It's not as if that it is gone to help the, let's say, the garment exporting companies or anything like that. They're very discrete, large companies. More of that. Maybe there's some amount which is to more scattered this thing. So as I said, what is the objective? That I didn't get clarity, and definitely, as I said, manufacturing as a percentage of GDP is not doing well. But what is it that you're trying to achieve? If you want to, for example, drive employment, that mostly MSMEs drive.
Mhm.
But one of the reasons why all this unemployment going up and this manufacturing going down is that there were those disruptions between our ex-chief statistical officer, Dr. Sen, had given this data that because of demonetization and the GST at that time, the number of MSMEs came down by 10 million, so about a crore. And during that time, actually, it should have gone up by a crore. So basically, there was a 2 crore shortfall in the number of enterprises. Now, employment is driven mostly by these MSMEs. This is the data in India because large corporates don't want to employ people. And this I'm not talking now. Even 20 years ago, I remember, steel plant, auto plant, the companies' boast used to be that we have no labor. We have 400 engineers and no blue collar at all. That used to be the boast, and so they don't want to employ more people. So the employing more people is the MSME. So that's why, I mean, depending on what you are trying to target, if you're trying to target employment, then you should be helping this kind of category rather than very discrete thing where maybe they will employ 5,000, 10,000 people, but that's it. So any intervention, you have to think about what is the objective and whether that's getting achieved.
So, do you think that right now, the way we are conducting our policy, there is scope for manufacturing to go up in terms of more contribution? Because I remember in 2015 or 16, when Make in India was launched, they wanted it to be 25%. So, I mean, just as a...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that the 5-6 years up till then, it was actually 17.5%, and it's gone down from there.
Yeah.
So
in the future, do you think that any of these specific interventions that they're making, because I remember reading something about this fund that they've created, 1 lakh crore fund for deep tech investments. The government is underwriting this, they're doing the evaluation of all these startups. So it doesn't seem like we're not breaking new ground in terms of achieving success. I mean, just from your perspective, because you've seen global companies across the world, what is it that we are missing here in terms of, because there seems to be a lot of bellyaching about...
See, one fundamental thing you are missing is, which every year people ask me, before budget, what's your ask? And I never have asked for taxes and all that. So it is, you invest in health and education. You look at the latest National Health Survey, and it is terrible that, still so many of your children are malnourished, are stunted, are underweight for that age. So unless you invest in health and education, you do not have even if your focus is only the economy, but unless you have good quality human capital, how are you going to do anything further? So if you look at China, for example, China spent on the human capital even before they industrialized. So by the time they really ramped up the industrialization, they had a literate and healthy population. So we are currently at a stage where you're not able to do that. So I mean, there's no sense saying have 3 kids each if you're not able to provide for the kids you already have. So that's one part of it, because people say that, yes, I mean, there are people where they are unemployable. If you talk to a lot of business owners, they will say that people are, even if they have on paper, they have finished just X amount of education, but actually they don't have any skills. They're not even, kind of teachable or trainable. So human capital is where the real focus should be. And of course, it is not, it's not glamorous. It doesn't give results in 1 year. So long ago, Of course, this scheme was originally introduced by Kamaraj, but I remember when I was very young, MGR was promoting this midday
Yeah.
scheme,
A lot
and
of states have taken
and
up
at
that.
that time, no, but at that time, all the pink papers used to be this is fiscally most imprudent and it will really ruin the finances. But that's what built Tamil Nadu. I mean, Tamil Nadu now standalone is pretty in many parameters equivalent to middle income countries,
Okay.
because unless you invest in that human capital, you look at, I mean, we are all very proud of all the Indian CEOs or Indian origin CEOs in US, but you got that because you invested in the IITs and IIMs back when no other Asian country did.
Got it. So just wanted to end with your personal recommendations in terms of, I mean, apart from your book, which we had shown in the beginning. What I like for our audience to have is, say, like, be it a book or a show or anything else that you may have, you think that people should, it'll enrich their lives. If you, let's say we have book, money myth and mantras, and then something else.
No, I am this weirdo who doesn't even have any OTT subscription. So for me, it's only books.
Even a movie would do
So
if you
as I
like
said, of
that.
the shows, I can't recommend. But books, I have too many recommendations. That's always my problem. Every year I do a best books I've read this year roundup. And even then it is difficult for me to bring it down to 10, 12. One, of course, permanent recommendation from me is Daniel Kahneman. So both his books are in among my top 5. Thinking Fast and Slow and Noise. But then many others. I mean, basically, I mean, this is something we didn't speak about, but easy to understand the finances and the numbers. More difficult to kind of get control of your mind. That's where most fall. If you look at long-term history, for example, of mutual fund investments in India, the inflows peak around the market peaks, they bottom out around the market bottoms. So, and you see this beautiful little compounding over the years, but SEBI data shows the majority of the mutual fund investors don't remain invested even for 2 years. And we spoke of Peter Lynch, that that fund compounded 29%. The average person in that fund, guess how much they compounded?
12%. Sorry.
7%.
Wow.
And a whole lot of them lost money in the best performing mutual fund in US history because they entered and exited at the wrong time. See, any kind of strategy, including ours, I mean, it doesn't outperform all the time. So what would happen in that fund also is that one year you have like a blockbuster performance, everybody rushes in, and almost invariably the next year will be an underperforming year. Then people rush out.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing you have to get. So Daniel Kahneman, of course, is, as I said, my permanent recommendation. Right now, I'm reading a book called Empire of AI, which is about this whole evolution, mainly about OpenAI, but also then about others.
Nice.
So, and also, I mean, something very different if you want. So there's this book called Sepia,
Okay.
which is about, it's a Hindi book, so it's about दोहे जो होते हैं,
Yeah.
Rahim ke, Kabir ke, Brind ke. So this is Javed Akhtar has taken 100 of those. So the actual thing is that the human nature doesn't change over hundreds of years, over thousands of years. Everything. That's why great literature persists, because no matter how the outer world changes, the humans are still the same. Now we talk about all this this mind-body connection and all that. So Kabir wrote it 700 years ago. चिंता ऐसी डाकिनी काट कलेजा खाए, वैद बेचारा क्या करे, कब तक दवा खिलाए. So मतलब the medicine will not work if it is like stress, which is causing your ailment. So I like to read a wide variety of things.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking out the time. Thanks for giving. I mean,
Thank you
the
for
last
having me.
recommendation was really incredible. Thanks a lot. Thanks. तो ये था बाजार एंड बियॉन्ड का आज का एपिसोड. दवीना मेहरा के इनसाइट से एक चीज़ क्लियरली समझ में आती है. इन्वेस्टिंग में सबसे बड़ा रिस्क सिर्फ मार्केट वॉलेटिलिटी नहीं होता, बल्कि वो बिलीव्स भी होते हैं जिन्हें हम बिना क्वेश्चन किए फॉलो करते हैं. चाहे बात हो रिटायरमेंट प्लानिंग की, इक्विटी एलोकेशन की, ग्लोबल डाइवर्सिफिकेशन की, या मार्केट नैरेटिव्स को समझने की. सक्सेसफुल इन्वेस्टिंग का कोर है डेटा, डिसिप्लिन, रिस्क मैनेजमेंट और इंडिपेंडेंट थिंकिंग. आज की कॉन्वर्सेशन का की टेकअवे सिंपल है. पोर्टफोलियो सिर्फ कंफर्ट के बेसिस पर नहीं बनाना चाहिए. उसे अपने गोल्स, टाइम होराइजन, रिस्क एपेटाइट और एविडेंस के बेसिस पर स्ट्रक्चर करना चाहिए। अगर आपको ये एपिसोड पसंद आया हो तो हमारे यूट्यूब चैनल को ज़रूर सब्सक्राइब करें। तो मिलते हैं अगले एपिसोड में, तब तक के लिए स्टे सेफ एंड इन्वेस्ट वाइजली।
Investments in securities markets are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.